Introduction. Imagine yourself in the fog-drenched streets of Victorian England, where the air is thick with a mixture of soot and the faint scent of decay. B. The sounds of the bustling city horse-drawn carts, the clatter of factory workers, and the cries of street vendors fill your ear. Yet, there is an underlying sense of heaviness, a sense of discomfort that never quite lifts. Tonight we journey back in time, into the heart of Victorian slums, where the everyday struggle for survival was a constant battle. We'll walk alongside those who lived in cramped, filthy conditions, enduring the harsh realities of industrialization, poverty, and disease. And yet, through it all, there was a resilience, a tenacity that quietly hums beneath the surface. This is not a tale of sweeping drama or sensationalism, but rather one of human endurance, of what it truly meant to live in one of the most challenging periods in history. As you listen, let the images of these forgotten streets and their stories drift into your mind. The struggles of the past, while distant, are close enough to feel. And as we explore each segment, feel free to let the calm pace wash over you slow, steady, like the passage of time itself. Now, let us begin. The Victorian slums were a world of their own, a place where the very air seemed to carry the weight of poverty. Picture yourself walking through narrow alleyways to cobblestone, slick with grime, as the fog swirls thick and persistent. In the dim light of early morning, the homes appear to be little more than crumbling shacks. These were not the tidy, picturesque houses of the prosperous middle class. No, these were the cramped, squalid dwellings of the working poor. The houses themselves were often little more than dark, damp boxes, with walls that seemed to sag under the weight of years of neglect. Imagine the musty smell that would greet you as you enter a blend of wet wood, damp stone, and the faint, lingering odor of mold. The rooms were small, overcrowded, and poorly ventilated, making it impossible for the families living there to escape the chill of winter or the stifling heat of summer. There were no luxuries, no fireplaces or clean sheets, no soft beds to lie in after a long day of grueling labor. On the streets outside, the situation was no better. Garbage piled up in heaps, left to rot under the watchful eyes of the few who could afford to step outside. The streets were a blur of active children, running barefoot through the muck, men and women rushing to and from the factories, and street vendors hawking their wares in the midst of it all. The smell of sewage mixed with the noise of industry, a constant reminder of how intertwined life was with the workings of the factories that dotted the landscape. You can almost hear the rhythmic clanking of machinery in the distance, a sound that never truly fades. It's the lifeblood of the Industrial Revolution, where the work of the many fuels the prosperity of the few. The factories themselves, towering and imposing, are a stark contrast to the humble, decaying homes of the slums. Men, women, and even children worked long hours in the factories, often in dangerous conditions. The air inside was thick with dust, making it hard to breathe, while the workers' hands, raw and calloused, moved in a blur of repetitive motion. The physical toll of factory life was immense. There were no health and safety regulations to protect the workers, no laws to prevent child labor, no protections against the dangerous machinery that often led to horrific accident. It's said that many people, after a lifetime of work in the factories, left with bodies broken and scarred. The very air they breathed in these dark, dank environments carried the silent weight of their struggle. And yet, amid the filth and the deprivation, there was a strange rhythm to life. Each day, the same routine played out, each person knowing their role in the great machine that was the city. The sound of the factory whistle in the morning signaled the start of another grueling day, and the tolling of the bell at night marked the end of it. The days might have seemed endless, but somehow life went on. Now, imagine the damp chill of those Victorian streets, where the air is thick with more than just fog and soot. Among the shadows of the slums, an insidious story unfolds, one that intertwines with the very fabric of working-class life. It is the chilling tale of Mary Ann Cotton, a woman whose life of crime cast a long, dark shadow over Victorian England. Mary Ann Cotton's story begins in the raw, unvarnished reality of Victorian poverty. Like many others, she was born into a world of hardship. Her early years were marked by the constant struggle for survival, a familiar tale for so many in the slums. But it was in the depths of this struggle that something far darker began to take shape. Mary Ann was not born a murderer. In the beginning, she, like countless others, was simply a woman trying to make a life in an unforgiving world. She was married at a young age, and as was often the case for women in Victorian England, her role was largely defined by her relationships with men. She married several times throughout her life, each marriage an attempt to climb out of poverty and make a better life for herself and her children. But behind her seemingly normal exterior, there was a cold, calculating side to Mary Ann. She had an unnerving ability to manipulate those around her, and her motives were often hidden beneath layers of charm and warmth. It was her relationships with the men in her life that would ultimately reveal her darkest secret. She was a serial killer, responsible for the deaths of up to 21 people, most of them her husbands and children. Mary Ann's method of murder was as insidious as the conditions of the slums themselves. She poisoned her victims with arsenic, a substance that was readily available at the time and commonly used in the home for various purposes. It was a slow, silent form of death, one that allowed her to escape suspicion for a time. The victims would fall ill, their bodies slowly deteriorating, and their deaths would be chalked up to the common afflictions of the era, tuberculosis or some other illness that was rampant in the unsanitary conditions of the working-class districts. But the deaths did not stop. Over time, people began to notice the strange pattern of Mary Ann's life. Each time she moved to a new town, a husband or child would die. The whisperings began, and suspicion grew. Eventually, Marianne's dark secret was uncovered, and she was arrested. Her trial was a spectacle, drawing crowds from all over to witness the downfall of one of the most notorious female serial killers in history. Mary and Cotton's case not only shocked the public, but it also highlighted the brutal realities of life in the slums. It raised uncomfortable questions about the lengths to which people would go to escape poverty, and the toll that a life of deprivation could take on the human soul. Marianne's actions were a reflection of the hard, often unforgiving world in which she lived, a world where survival was a constant struggle, and where people could be driven to extremes to secure their futures, no matter the cost. The story of Marianne Cotton is a chilling reminder that beneath the surface of Victorian society, in the shadows of the slums, there were dark, unspeakable things happening. But even in the darkest corners, there were those who fought to survive, often at any cost. As we drift onward through the haze of Victorian England, imagine the stillness just before dawn in a slum street. The silence is not peaceful, it's heavy, uneasy. A child coughs from behind thin walls. A woman pours cloudy water from a pail. And somewhere not far off, a man retches into the gutter. Something is wrong in the city. Cholera had come. In the 19th century, cholera swept through cities like a silent reaper, invisible, inexplicable, and deadly. In the overpopulated, unsanitary slums, it struck with terrifying speed. People would fall ill in the morning and be gone before night. For the working class, already battered by malnutrition and poor housing, it was another unrelenting threat, made worse by the absence of understanding. At the time, disease was thought to spread through miasma or bad air. The theory felt right. The stench of the slums was nauseating, almost tactile. Every breath carried with it the scent of open drains, animal waste, human refuse. It was easy to believe death floated in the air itself, but the true killer didn't waft it, lurked in the very thing people needed to live: water. The summer of 1854 was dry and hot. In Soho, London, the Broad Street pump-an, iron fixture many relied on, stood like an innocent guardian. Day after day, people came to fill their buckets, seeking refreshment. But it was from this pump that cholera flowed silently into hundreds of homes. And here enters a man named John Snow. No, not the sword-wielding kind, but a quiet, methodical doctor with a notebook and a theory. He didn't believe in miasma. He believed the disease was carried in water, specifically contaminated water. It was an idea both radical and ridiculed at the time. But Snow wasn't interested in winning debate. He was interested in saving lives. He began knocking on doors, collecting the stories of the dead. One by one, he plotted the addresses of cholera victims on a map of Soho. The clusters told a silent story. Around the Broad Street pump, the dots thickened. Further out, they thinned. A pattern began to emerge, not one of chance, but of proximity. The ghost map was born a haunting. simple image of death and deduction. With it, Snow approached the authority reluctantly. They removed the handle of the broad street pump. Privy. Effect was immediate. Although the epidemic was already subsiding, the act of disabling the pump marked a turning point. Snow's work would later lay the foundation for modern epidemiology. In time, his theory was validated. The water had been contaminated by sewage from a nearby seeping into the groundwater and spreading cholera with every scoop drawn from the pump. Let's pause, here not on the triumph, but on the texture of the time. Imagine yourself standing beside that pump, the handle slick from use, the air warm, buzzing faintly with fly around you. Homes are grieving. A mother cradles a child she cannot save. A boy walks barefoot, bucket in hand, unaware he carries death. These were ordinary people, victims of extraordinary ignorance and infrastructure. They trusted the water. They had no choice. The ghost map is not just a marvel of science, it is a quiet monument to those lost. It is a reminder that the past was not only hard, but often painfully preventable. And that from within the suffering, progress can emerge slow, careful, and rooted in observation. Now, as the streets of Soho begin to fade behind us, the fog lifting slightly, we turn our attention toward a very different part of Victorian society. Far from the slums, beyond the stink of disease and the clamor of factory bells, lies a world of hushed refinement and delicate porcelain. Let us now leave behind the soot-streaked tenements, the poisonings, and the poisoned well. Imagine yourself ascending, physically, socially, atmospherically, into the rarefied air of the Victorian elite. The streets are wider here. The houses are detached, adorned with creeping ivy and shining brass doors. A butler opens the door silently, and you are ushered into a world almost surreal in its quiet dignity. This is the realm of the aristocracy. Here, the rhythm of life is altogether different. It moves, not to the clatter of looms or the cries of streetwalkers, but to the soft chime of the drawing-room clock and the delicate rustle of silk skirts. The air is scented with polished wood, fresh-cut flowers, and the ever-present aroma of finely steeped tea. It is late afternoon, the hour of tea. Tea was not merely a drink. In Victorian high society was a ritual, a performance, an assertion of class and control. Everything had its place. The silver teapot warmed at the touch, the fine bone china cups, the tiered tray of cucumber sandwiches, crusts trimmed with geometric precision, scones warm, dense, crumbly served with clotted cream and jam, cakes so delicate they barely held their form. To the outsider, this might seem extravagant, even absurd, but for the Victorian elite, tea was an essential, pause-quiet reinforcement of order. Reviewers, it was a time to discuss matters of the house, of society, of fashion, and occasionally, with subtle language, of politics. It was where alliances were formed, marriages quietly weighed, and reputations cemented or dissolved with a glance. There were unspoken rules, of course. Napkins on laps, not collars. One never slurped, never clinked. The spoon against the cup, and never under any That was gauche, vulgar, even when the family coffers ran low. Appearances had to be preserved, like a fragile heirloom vase. Never chipped, never cracked. The tea table, for women, was both stage and cage. Here, they exercised the limited influence allotted to them, through conversation, charm, and the right kind of subtlety. Women of means navigated a world that often denied them real power. Behind the veil of polite conversation, there were real maneuvers. Social strategizing, reputation management, and quiet sabotage, all served with sugar and cream. For the men, afternoons were often spent in the study or the club sipping brandy, smoking cigars, discussing colonial policy or railway shares. Their world was slightly more direct, but just as constrained by expectation and hierarchy. One's voice, one's posture, even the style of one's cravat communicated status. Beneath the genteel surface, the same Victorian contradictions lingered. Here, far from the cholera-stricken slums, people dined on imported delicacies, while others starved. They read novels by gaslight, discussing the plight of the poor, as abstractly as one might debate the weather. They contributed to charitable societies, sometimes with genuine care, sometimes as a social requirement. The divide was vast but quiet, polished, yet, even in these corridors of comfort, the expectations of class were a constant pressure. Children were raised not just to be good, but to be proper. Marriages were arranged for social positioning. Emotions were dressed up, muted. Servants were ever present, and yet invisible. Trained to move silently, never to meet the master's eye, unless spoken to. And always, the tea tray returned. Day after day, a comfort. A performance, a shield. Imagine yourself now sitting in a habacked chair, the cup warm in your hand, a ticking clock nearby. By outside, the garden is bathed in gentle light. Inside, there is stillness. It is easy here to forget the factories, the slums, the arsenic. They are still there. Tea in the parlor and hunger in the alley. Oh, opera in the evening and cuffing in the workhouse. That is the paradox of Victorian England. Elegance and squalor, side by side, separated not by distance, but by class. And now, as the final crumbs are swept away by a discreet maid, we prepare to return from this long journey through time toward rest, towards stillness.